We've put together a list of 15 must-try free games on Steam that might just blow your socks off, but not your wallet. While some of these titles might sound familiar, there are definitely a few hidden gems in here you might not have discovered yet and do not want to miss out on. At number 15, we have a game that is literally tailor-made for history buffs and aviation fanatics. War Thunder is a free-to-play flight and war sim that basically takes vehicular warfare out of the big modern wars of this era and turns it into its own game. It lets players become part of 3 main types of vehicular combat, giving them control over different aircraft, ground vehicles, and naval fleets. But War Thunder is more than just a simulation. It's an MMO that consists of a comprehensive PvP system that fully encourages dynamic multiplayer battles ranging across different difficulties and maps, which is saying something considering how seriously massive the game is. It features around 2,500 different war vehicles and 100 maps inspired by the major conflicts of the 20th century, including World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. It also incorporates the weaponry and tactics of the plethora of countries and nations that were actively part of these wars. At number 14, we have a game that isn't unheard of in the gaming community. Path of Exile is an action RPG with a massive online community and an extensive gameplay system that makes it one of the most surprisingly robust free-to-play games on Steam. Given its expansive world building, complex mechanics, in-game currency, rich lore, and even its detailed item economy, the fact that it's free-to-play is a perk in its own right. Set against a dark fantasy backdrop, the game takes place in Wraeclast, a desolate continent ruled over by corruption and malice. As the player, you play the role of an exile who has to navigate through the hard terrain of the continent and rise through the ranks in order to wage war against the very people responsible for your downfall. You get to choose between 7 different base classes, all with their own sets of skills and quirks, and forge your own path to success. The game is incredibly customizable and can literally be played to fit any playstyle, class, and skill tree. Number 13, Warframe. Warframe is another free-to-play action RPG that's fairly well known in the gaming industry. It's a third-person shooter that features some of the best graphics you'll find in the free-to-play scene. In fact, its visuals are easily comparable to some really big names in the industry, titles that are definitely not free. Warframe's gameplay is just as intense as you'd expect from a game that looks this good. It basically follows Tenno, a group of warriors with supernatural powers and indestructible mechanical suits in their war against other hostile factions. As one of the Tenno, you'll explore a massive futuristic open world, upgrade your warframe, develop your skills, and unlock an endless array of mechanics and options to become the ultimate warrior. The game offers players some serious flexibility in how they can play and features both solo quests with over 30 storylines and co-op modes that are an absolute blast. At number 12, we have Brawlhalla, a 2D platformer fighting game with a very active esports scene. Unlike the darker, more serious games we've seen earlier, Brawlhalla is bright, fun, and exactly what it claims to be. A brawler fighting game with over-the-top animations and an impressively large number of playing modes catering to all tastes. The game essentially plays out like a more casual version of a deathmatch where you just jump into the fighting part against 4 to 8 enemies and play until there's only one standing. You'll need to knock your enemies out of the arena and keep up the pressure until they either give up or you out-damage the rest of the players. Farm sims have always had a certain repute in the gaming community, attributed to their role as the type of games you'd play to chill the heck out. Simultaneously, there's still a level of strictness when it comes to gauging the playability of a good farm sim. Palia, at number 11, is one of the newer titles that has not only met these expectations, but has also managed to make its mark in the world of farm sims. It's a delightfully diverse and cozy open world farm sim where you can do just about anything you want. Farm, build, explore, hunt, cook, fish, forge, tame, the list goes on. With its beautifully muted, Disney-like graphics and quirky characters, Palia has a certain charm that sets it apart from other farm sims. At number 10, we have Jaded, an indie platformer game that plays out exactly like you'd expect it to. It's not that different from your average 2D pixelated platformer game, with its classic platformer combat and side-scrolling action, but that's precisely what makes it so great. The graphics and art style are oddly satisfying, and when combined with its unusually fast-paced action, it becomes a masterpiece. Your character is someone known as the Jade Being, a mysterious green-headed entity with a supposedly important but completely unknown purpose. As the Jade Being, you have to traverse wild biomes and use your time-stalling powers and burst jumps to battle through hordes and hordes of weird alien-like creatures. In 2012, an indie developer known as The Game Company released a game that put the entire gaming industry in a chokehold. For those of you who do not know, Journey is a wonderfully vague silent indie game centered around exploring dead civilizations and fleeting memories, a type of game you'd play just to torment yourself with sentimentality and emotions. The Game Company's latest release, Sky Children of the Light, is another minimalist gem that follows in the footsteps of Journey, evoking the same deep emotional resonance and doing exactly what its predecessor game does, tugging on some already weak heartstrings. Although the game isn't tragic per se, it definitely has a vibe that wraps its open world and storyline in a unique, almost mystical aura. It has extensive lore and world building that adds a certain profoundness to the game's overall ambiance. You, as the player character, have to go through various islands of a lost kingdom that represent different stages of your life. Along the way, you'll have to navigate around challenges that, at their core, cleverly mirror real-life problems. Number 8. Enlisted. Enlisted is a massively multiplayer first-person shooter that again revolves around the 20th century wars, most particularly World War II. If you're into hand-to-hand combat, shooting, and vehicular action, think of Enlisted as a more intense and detailed version of War Thunder. And if that is your cup of tea, the game is an absolute unit when it comes to war tactics, strategizing, and that good old COD-style FPS action. Enlisted massive setting features various prominent locations and lets you play as one of the 4 major countries involved: USA, USSR, Japan, and Germany. It's a squad-based game that allows you to build your entire platoon from scratch, but also lets you mix, match, and maneuver all sorts of military equipment and trained soldiers. You get to play around with literally every arsenal weapon one would find in an actual war, which Enlisted does a positively godlike job of reenacting. Featuring at number 7, we have a casual puzzle game called Resonance of the Ocean. This game is exactly what you'd expect from a title centered around oceans, and no, it's not like Subnautica. It's a charming, nature-focused game that has the most adorable characters and calming hand-drawn art you'll ever see. The game is of course set near an ocean and follows the main character as she explores and searches for various objects in the water to create cute musical notes with. The goal is to find these items and use them as instruments to match the different sounds the game presents. At number 6, we finally have a game that shifts its narrative and jumps into a more unsettling, almost creepy ambiance. Babdi is a first-person exploration game set in a dark, seemingly abandoned ghost town where players have to take whatever little info they're given and find a way out. The backdrop of this game is, to say the least, dreadful. It isn't outright horror, nor does it have elements that give off supernatural paranormal vibes. Yet, the general uncertainty and desolation surrounding its gameplay will definitely remind you of a traditional Backrooms game. Since it is ultimately marketed as a casual game, all you, as the player, have to do is go around the open world map, talk to harmless, albeit eerie-looking NPCs, and collect different collectible items to unlock abilities. Ranked at number 5 is a battle royale that ticks every fight-to-death box you could ask for. Naraka: Bladepoint is an action survival multiplayer that focuses on martial arts and melee combat. The game heavily incorporates traditional elements but fully embraces its exaggerated fantasy setting, making it all the more awesome. Like most free-to-play games, Naraka doesn't follow a fixed premise. Instead, you're thrown onto an island with up to 60 players and have to battle it out until you're the last person standing. You get to select a hero and build up their skills and abilities as you move through the game's massive map, either with other players or alone. Along the way, you'll find weapons, gear, and other useful items to power you up. Ranked at number 4 is SCP: Secret Laboratory, a much-needed horror respite from all the fun action, fantasy, and cutesy stories we've seen so far. It's a horror game inspired by the SCP world that puts you into the shoes of a relatively normal test subject who has to survive a containment breach of a laboratory. As with all things SCP, you'll be up against some seriously creepy hostile entities, each with their own attack patterns and terrifying mannerisms. Secret Laboratory can be played solo or in co-op, But the real fun kicks in with multiplayer. The best part? Most of the entities and mobs in the game can be controlled by other players, whether it's an enemy faction, a supernatural entity, or even one of the good guys. Featuring at number 3 is EVE Online, a massive multiplayer that truly puts the massive in MMO. It's a horizontal progression game that goes above and beyond, literally into space, to become one of the most immersive and adaptable experiences out there. While it is already fairly famous and has a massive fan base, EVE Online definitely deserves as much love as it can get. EVE Online isn't your typical MMO, where the main goal is to power up your character and smoothly reach the end game. It's all about freedom and how you interact with the vast universe and other players. There's no clear-cut good guy or bad guy. Everything is shaped by your choices and actions. In this game, your story is whatever you want it to be. At number 2, we have a game you've probably heard of, even if you haven't had the chance to play it yet. The latest big free-to-play release on Steam, Once Human, is an open-world survival game that's making waves. This little game drops you into a post-apocalyptic world taken over by an alien substance called Stardust. Anyone who comes into contact with this mysterious material, whether by breathing, consuming, or touching it, ends up turning into a mindless, violent version of themselves. As an enhanced human with the power to control this outbreak, your mission is to survive in this unforgiving world. Once Human is basically a scarier, better-looking take on the average survival sim. You start with nothing and have to gradually forge, collect, loot, fight, and build your way to safety. Much of the gameplay revolves around gathering resources and food, constructing a base, and making sure you don't inhale more than a healthy amount of stardust. There's nothing quite like a cute anime game that turns into one of the most traumatic psychological horror experiences you'll ever have. At number 1, we have the most unexpected game on this list, an outwardly adorable visual novel with no grinding that shifts gears so hard it gives players the biggest whiplash of their gaming lives. Doki Doki Literature Club starts off as a lighthearted dating sim visual novel where you follow an unnamed male protagonist who gets dragged into his high school's literature club by his friend. There, he interacts with the club's members, all girls, and chooses who to pursue as his love interest. But this club isn't just about writing cute love letters and crafting creative poems. What begins as a sweet, innocent experience quickly spirals into a twisted, dark, and psychologically disturbing story that breaks the fourth wall in the most unsettling, skin-crawling ways one could imagine. So folks, there you have it, 15 free-to-play games on Steam that you absolutely have to try. Let us know what you think.